The world of jazz feels as if it has lost one of its central rhythms. Jack Dejohnette, gone at 83, leaves behind a silence that echoes louder than any applause he ever received. Yet somehow, in that silence, his beats continue. When news of his passing spread across the globe on October 26, 2025, it wasn't just musicians who felt the loss. It was everyone who understood that some artists don't just play music, they become the heartbeat of an entire art form. Jack Dejohnette was such an artist. What happened next would become the stuff of jazz legend. At Axe Memorial Service in New York, longtime friend and collaborator Herbie Hancock took to the stage alone. The crowd fell silent. No one knew what to expect. Then, with hands that had shared stages with Jack for over 5 decades, Herbie began to play. The piece was Heart Echoes, a duet they had recorded together in 2024. But now, hauntingly, only the piano remained. Each note Herbie played seemed to leave space for Jack's drums. Spaces that would never be filled again. Witnesses say you could hear people weeping throughout the hall. One of the greatest musical conversations in jazz history was having its final chapter written right before their eyes. But to understand the power of that moment, why it stunned the entire jazz world and brought even the most stoic musicians to tears, we need to go back to where it all began. Chicago, 1942. A young Jack Dejohnette is growing up in a home where music isn't just entertainment. It's the language of everyday life. His uncle Roy Wood Sr., a respected local DJ, fills the house with the sounds of Ray Charles, Duke Ellington, and Count Basie. At just 4 years old, Jack begins classical piano lessons, long before he ever touches a drum. Those early piano studies would shape his entire approach to percussion. Years later, critics would marvel at how melodic his drumming was, how he could make a drum kit sing as if it were a piano. But those who knew his story understood. Jack always heard drums as melody, not just rhythm. By 18, while studying at the American Conservatory of Music, Jack began to shift his focus to drums. Nights spent in Chicago's smoky clubs transformed him. He wasn't just keeping time, he was telling stories with each beat. Jazz veterans twice his age would watch in amazement as this young drummer moved effortlessly between blues, bebop, and funk, sometimes within the same song. Jack would later say that Chicago taught him how to hear music from seemingly rhythmless things. Train whistles, car horns, street conversations, everything had its own tempo, its own voice. His job wasn't to impose rhythm, but to discover the natural rhythms already present in the world. This philosophy would carry him into the orbit of Miles Davis in 19. It was here, during jazz's seismic shift toward fusion, that Jack's distinctive style fully emerged. He wasn't just a drummer in Miles' band, he was a force pushing the music into unexplored territory. But it was another relationship that would define Jack's musical legacy even more profoundly, his lifelong collaboration with Herbie Hancock. They first connected in the early 1970s when Herbie was searching for a drummer who could break boundaries. In Jack, he found not just a timekeeper, but a kindred spirit. Their musical connection was immediate and profound. When Jack plays drums, Herbie once said, "I feel like I'm talking with sound." All the reactions between us happen naturally, without any planning. Over the next 5 decades, they would create some of jazz's most enduring music together. From the groundbreaking Headhunters tour in 1973 to the Parallel Realities project in 1990 with Pat Metheny and Dave Holland, their partnership redefined how jazz, funk, and world music could blend into a single, seamless expression. As they entered their 70s, their collaboration deepened into something more spiritual than commercial. Their performances became less about showing technical prowess and more about conveying emotion and wisdom. Jack didn't drum to keep time. He created space for conversation, which brings us to 2023 when everything changed. Doctors diagnosed Jack with congestive heart failure, forcing him to cancel all performance plans. After decades of constant motion, he returned to his home in Kingston, New York to receive treatment and rest with family. But even as his physical strength declined, his creative spirit remained undiminished. Unable to play drums with his former intensity, Jack returned to his first instrument, the piano. He transformed his home studio into a place for quiet composition and contemplation, focusing on recording and arranging rather than live performance. "I always believed that each piece of music was a dialogue with myself," he shared in a rare interview. "When my body was weak, I just replaced the drum beat with a heartbeat." In 2024, his dream telepathy project with Danilo Perez and John Petitucci revealed a different Jack Dejohnette, more thoughtful and restrained, using sound to tell stories rather than showcase technique. Critics noted how he had distilled his vast musical knowledge down to its essential elements, nothing wasted, every note purposeful. During this period, Jack began conducting online jam sessions with young musicians. Rather than performing himself, he listened and guided. His students later called these classrooms of silence, spaces where Jack taught not through demonstration but through the power of attentive listening. "Age is no limit to creativity," he told Jazz Times magazine. "The limit is only in how we perceive sound." All the while, Jack quietly worked on a collection he called Unity, music centered on healing and connection. Those involved with the project said Jack viewed it as a thank you note to the audiences who had followed him throughout his long journey. The album was completed in early 2025, just months before his passing. In July 2025, despite his declining health, Jack made one final public appearance at the Newport Jazz Festival. Seated at the piano with Herbie Hancock beside him, they created an impromptu 10-minute duet that left the audience speechless. Those present described it not as a performance but as a conversation between two souls who had spent half a century speaking through music. No one knew it then, but this would be Jack's final time on stage. He returned to Kingston after Newport, devoting his remaining energy to his family and his music. On October 26, 2025, the news came. Jack Dejohnette had passed away peacefully at home, surrounded by loved ones and the music that had defined his life. The tributes poured in immediately. Keith Jarrett wrote, "He taught me that every drum beat contains a human soul." Herbie's message was simpler but no less profound. Jack didn't just drum, he breathed life into time. Which brings us back to that memorial service, where Herbie Hancock delivered perhaps the most powerful tribute of all, not through words but through music. As heart echoes filled the hall that November day, something extraordinary happened. Witnesses say that halfway through the piece, Herbie stopped playing for several measures, leaving space where Jack's drums would have been. In that moment of intended silence, many in the audience swore they could still hear the ghost of Jack's rhythms, as if his spirit had joined Herbie on stage one last time. When Herbie resumed playing, the melody had subtly changed, becoming not a eulogy but a continuation. This wasn't goodbye. It was an acknowledgement that some conversations never truly end. Jack was one of those rare people who made music feel like breathing to me, Herbie later explained. Our collaboration wasn't about playing together, it was about living together through sound. The relationship had always been built on a simple principle. Music isn't about technical perfection, it's about emotional truth. In a 2019 conversation, Jack once recalled, "Herbie made me realize that sound didn't have to be perfect, it just had to be real." This philosophy defined Jack's entire approach to music. Over 6 decades, he created more than 20 solo albums and appeared on hundreds of recordings with other artists. Whether working with Charles Lloyd in the 1960s, Miles Davis during the Revolution,